Production design demands nothing less than the creation of worlds. Apart from the actors, the cameras, and the lights, design controls everything else that appears on screen, turning words and fantasies into physical reality. These are our picks for the 10 best production design films of all time. To help get our bearings here, we're going to spend our first 2 slots exploring what we think are 2 very important poles on the spectrum of design, from heightened and stylized to understated and naturalistic. And for the former, flashier side of production design, we find sets and decor that focus on maximum visual impact, even if that means looking styled. The design grabs your attention, allowing it to directly participate in the telling of the story now that you're no longer looking past it. Here we think of the Red Shoes, and Terry Gilliam's work, especially Brazil, and that of Jean-Pierre Jeunet. Kubrick can lean this way, like in A Clockwork Orange, as can Martin Scorsese, although only sometimes. We imagine Tim Burton probably sees his everyday world through some kind of heightened lens, and we especially love what he and his designers came up with in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Sweeney Todd. However, as far as heightened design goes, there is nobody who takes it quite to the level of Wes Anderson, whose design is great in The Royal Tenenbaums, even better in The Life of Aquatic with Steve Zissou, and absolutely off the charts in our first pick, The Grand Budapest Hotel.
Because so much of the movie takes place in this hotel, our first task was to find a great old hotel and to then build the production around that.
So we looked all over Central Europe, anywhere where there might still be a great old grand hotel that was just sitting there empty waiting to be used by us, which turned out didn't really exist.
Along the way, we stumbled across a department store that was empty.
The production took it over, and the interior of that shopping mall has become the interior of the hotel.
Pulling always ultra-specific references from Kodachrome postcards, Wes's imagination, and the paintings of Gustav Klimt, Grand Budapest was the second collaboration between Wes and production designer Adam Stockhausen. Always real, often handmade, the entire world of Grand Budapest is styled around a particular frame rather than vice versa, resulting in an ultra-composed, living, breathing world of fictional Eastern Europe pre- and post-war. And this multi-era decoration is perhaps one of the most compelling testaments to the power of good design. Here we can see on full display the exact same spaces used to entirely different effect. Different decor communicates wealth and whimsy, but also decline, sad practicality, and the bygone. The character of the world shifted dramatically via color and furniture and density and design. At the center of attention and in your face isn't the only way for production design to have an effect. The design of a world still works on you in the background. You've probably seen these frames before, and the design of the space almost certainly made you feel a certain way, even though you're probably only paying direct attention to it for the first time just now. Imagine how much different this would feel with a lesser desk, or a different set of drapes, or a plainer carpet, or wallpaper that wasn't peeling just so. None of these examples are particularly heightened. They all feel like they belong to the worlds they're in, and yet they too are design. Some of our favorite films that employ naturalistic design principles to huge effect include the Three Colors trilogy and its subtle, believable color motifs, Beasts of a Southern Wild, Tom Ford's work on Nocturnal Animals and A Single Man, and the impeccable design of Tree of Life. Room gets tons of mileage out of the intimacy of its tiny spaces, but for our second pick, we want to focus on beginners.
Yeah, I don't know. Give me the flashlight.
It's nice.
Oh, that's nice.
Oh, Andy brought those for you.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, who did that painting?
Well, I don't know. It's just a painting on the wall.
And these?
They're just photos, Pop.
But how do they relate to the exhibit?
They're just personal photos. They're not art.
Beginner spends much of its screen time existing within a space that is saturated in the history of a character, in this case, Oliver's father, Hal. And this is not an accident. These characters are artists and museum directors, people who've dedicated their lives to the arrangement of design in space. But unlike Grand Budapest, Shane Valentino's work almost never asks you to focus on an aesthetic or a designed frame in a way that points to its designedness. Instead, decor almost always seems to be an outgrowth of personality and individuality. Every single piece of furniture and house home, a testament to a lifelong journey of learning who he is. And then, to an effect just as astonishing as Grand Budapest's, we see the results of the passage of time on a space as it is emptied out after his father's death. We see his personality cast in relief, and it is heartbreaking to watch his humanity leaving the world. On completely opposite ends of the design spectrum, both films develop their own thesis about how human change drives the shape of the worlds we inhabit through their aesthetic. Now that we've sort of traced the boundaries here, it's time for us to break into the various genres. And first on the torture table is horror. From the grimy minimalism of Eraserhead to the brilliant Bates Motel in Psycho to the unbelievable textures and personality of the house in Crimson Peak, The Cell is endlessly imaginative in all its different looks, while Suspiria put a whole new palette on terror. And then, of course, there is the Overlook Hotel. Good God, is that place perfect. But the only thing that could displace The Shining on this list, a landmark in cinema and horror and production and design, would be the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Dr. Caligari is perhaps the peak of stylization in design. The crowning jewel of German expressionism, the work of REIMANN, ROHRD, and Worm distorts its entire world beyond anything remotely resembling reality, favoring instead the jagged, gnarled, horrific convolutions of a world gone mad. In this tale of madness in a mental institution, no angle is square, no wall is plumb, everything seems to be just the wrong size, and the shadows are painted directly onto the set. Caligari is innovative in how explicitly it's willing to express the mental interior in its external design, paving the way for contemporary innovations like Batman Returns, Edward Scissorhands, and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. It broke every rule imaginable and landed itself in the history books in the process. After horror, we turn to visions of the future in sci-fi, and there we find sleek Scandinavian modernism with a gorgeously minimalistic robo-basement in Ex Machina. We find unbelievable scope, especially in model form, in Metropolis. We find more of Terry Gilliam's madcap bric-a-brac insanity in 12 Monkeys, and a slick, corporate-ish dystopia in The Minority Report. We find zany, colorful, cartoonish fun in The Fifth Element, vicious diesel punk violence communicated almost entirely through vehicles in Mad Max Fury Road, and a bleak, grimy interstellar tanker in the world of Alien. 2001: A Space Odyssey showed us a sleek, sterile, technological future unlike any we had ever seen before on celluloid, but for our sci-fi pick, there are two films that we think have done it in a way that borders on genius, and we're not going to even try to choose between them. They are Bladerunner and Her. Lawrence G. Paull's vision of the future in Blade Runner imagines something radically different than had ever come before. Compared to the monolithic, sterile, and unifying visions of a singular future aesthetic that preceded it, Blade Runner is messy, polycultural, economically stratified, overflowing with the competing design aesthetics of different influences. Its design is built amidst the wreckage of decades and centuries past. Hers, K.K. Barrett, takes a different direction completely, envisioning a future that fetishizes the retro, recognizing that in the right context, the retro can look futuristic too. Its world looks mostly like our own with a few key additions and subtractions that allow it to feel ever so slightly other. It is possibly the most naturalistic vision of the future ever put on film, but so emotionally intelligent in that achievement, recognizing that future consumers won't want to be sold a future, but a more comfortable, quiet link to an idealized past. Both of these films don't just look gorgeous and completely unique, but they base their design decisions on a few key assumptions about how culture might develop based on some brilliant insights into how it works today. By the inviolable logic of genres, sci-fi must always be considered adjacent to our next category, fantasy. And here, it's pretty much just open season for production designers. I mean, just take a look at the magic they conjured up for a series of unfortunate events, and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, for The Wizard of Oz, The Holy Mountain, and Pan's Labyrinth, the gorgeous world of the subconscious and what dreams may come, an entire hidden world of witches and wizards in the Harry Potters, and a Southern California meets Verona, Italy, Romeo and Juliet. However, where world building is concerned, sometimes the obvious pick is the right pick. And here, both of those picks belong to the world of The Lord of the Rings.
It's amazing how authentic genuinely authentic it feels, that you start to believe that it could possibly be history. I guess the way that we tried to hint at the depth, which is all that the film can really do, was partly in our design process. I didn't want movie design. I didn't want fantasy movie, Hollywood sort of style of design. I wanted something that felt authentic.
The Lord of the Rings trilogy is perhaps one of the most impressive acts of world building ever brought to film. The design brought to life dozens of different cultures, habitats, biomes, ruins, and nations, with unique looks for different races, for good and evil, at multiple scales. But production designer Grant Major didn't do this without help. The concept art of the film came from Tolkien's original illustrators, drawing from a history of visual material that was tied to the novels. The result blends the historical, the mythical, and the utterly imagined into what really feels like an entire new world. There is, of course, one genre so essential to the production design canon that it's practically a cliche come Oscar time. We are, of course, referring to the period piece. We're talking gorgeously ornate Elizabethan and Victorian costume dramas like The Leopard, Room with a View, and Howard's End, the two-tiered world of Titanic, the gorgeous Russian aristocracy of Anna Karenina, and the purposefully over-elaborate punk monarchy of Marie Antoinette. Amadeus is delightfully over the top, Dangerous Liaisons oozes tasteful design without the excess, and oh god does Barry Lyndon make us feel some kind of way about paintings and drapes. In fact, it would almost certainly run away with this slot in a world where our pick, Fanny and Alexander, didn't exist.
När biskopsgården byggdes så var man inte så noga med bekvämligheten. Mina föregångare har varit angelägna att bevara allt i oförändrat skick och jag följer traditionen. I de här gamla rummen finns en skönhet som är oförgänglig. Vi ska vara tacksamma att vi får leva i en atmosfär av kärvhet och renhet.
It really was hard not to hand this slot to Ken Burns' peerless work on Barry Lyndon's spectacular interior. But slightly closer to the stylized end of the spectrum, Anna Asp's Fanny and Alexander stretches the period decor 18 different ways to a new effect each time. It twists and turns the over-intricate palatial decor of the period into all kinds of different niches. Comfortable and austere, homey and dour, sweet and lonely, overlooked and eerie, each set decorated with care and specificity without ever feeling out of place. It dramatically expanded the possibilities of an era in a way that really imbues each and every physical space with endless feeling. With that having been said, period pieces are so essential to good design that we aren't just dedicating one category to them, but four. And for our second one, we're looking before the Elizabethan era to that early period piece. Here we find Gladiator and Kingdom of Heaven, and the amazing, fantastical hybrid creativity of 300. There are some unbelievable takes on the Middle Ages, including our favorite, Hard to Be a God. And then there's the East, with ancient Japan being just barely surpassed by a few spectacular works in ancient China, Crouching Tiger, Curse of the Golden Flower, and our pick, the absolutely poetic and ever favorite Hero. Hero is another example of stylization at its best, this time driven not by the possibility of insanity, but of embellishment and fabrication in storytelling, each iteration of the story getting its own monochromatic treatment, augmenting the Spartan palaces of the Qin dynasty with minimalist accents, often only simple fabric, to maximum visual impact. Ting Xiaohuo and Xin Shuyi's simple, often repeating design elements make a huge splash, often circling back around with a slightly different color treatment to imbue revised versions of the tale with an entirely different feeling. It speaks volumes to the power of a singular design concept placed so far forward in the foreground that the audience must respond to it. Moving back to the other side of the Elizabethan era, we find ourselves right around the first half of the 20th century, being transported back in time to the worlds of There Will Be Blood, Gone with the Wind, The Great Gatsby, Citizen Kane, The Handmaiden, The Conformist, The Last Emperor, Schindler's List, Atonement, and Phantom Thread. But we are so blown away by the immersive believability of The Godfather's design of the 40s and 50s that the only film that manages to convince us even more is its sequel, The Godfather Part 2.
Godfather really kind of set the tone for taking that kind of movie out of the the old days of the old Paul Muni movies and Edward G. Robinson movies, and took it into a whole other kind of level of reality.
Expanding on the foreboding, gorgeous world of 40s power from the first Godfather and the fearlessness involved in sometimes cluttering it up with Chinese takeaway boxes, the second installment in the Godfather trilogy manages not one but two incredible periods across 3 different countries. Every single set shimmers with a period-appropriate naturalism and never showy but ever-appropriate amount of detail that honestly makes us feel like Coppola had somehow shot the thing through a portal into the past. Nothing ever looks posed or recreated or overly restored, even as entire turn-of-the-century city blocks were entirely created from scratch. Dean Tavoularis' work on The Godfather 2 is a high watermark in a career characterized by peerless taste, recreating decades that many still remembered not as a series of off-limits historical exhibits and backdrops, but worlds filled with the kind of life characters could reach out and touch. Moving forward into the second half of the last century, we find our last period piece stop, pursuing gorgeous looks at the 50s in The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, 60s in Catch Me If You Can, the 70s in American Hustle, and the 80s in Everybody Wants Some. We find Zodiac and Selma and A Serious Man. In fact, there are so many films set in these decades that are very nearly perfect in their design that we couldn't just pick 1 or 2 or 3 to talk about. So instead, feast your eyes on a 4-way tie montage in honor of what we think are the very best. Revolutionary Road, In the Mood for Love, Inside Llewyn Davis, and The Master. Finally, our tour of period pieces deposits us in the present with a look at the best of contemporary design. Not just designing within the current period, but attempting to capture its essence in its design. Today, the Florida Project, The Lobster, and Lost in Translation all show us different sketches of our world. The Social Network is flawless in designing a clash in the upper echelons of our society, and Playtime explored the gorgeous alienation of its time in an uber-stylish send-up of modernity. But for our last pick, we think nothing has quite combined humor, humanity, loneliness, and character like the idiosyncratic design of Roy Andersson's Living Trilogy. Every single one of the over 100 vignettes in the Living Trilogy is fabricated entirely from the ground up for its own precise camera angle. He actually puts the camera there first and then builds the set around it, incorporating detailed trompe-l'oeil, seamless backdrops, puppets, and miniatures, sometimes in an act of dissatisfaction, scrapping the whole thing to start from scratch. Which means that this is inside a film studio. And this too. His design specificity is borderline neurotic, but by God does it work. The elaborate plannedness of it all makes details like the particularly bright yellowness of a chair or the strange placement of a pipe almost worth marveling over and occasionally laughing at in their own right. The effect is one of hyper-reality. It is the world over-curated and distilled down into extra detail. It feels like a generic nowhere with splashes of specific everywhere. Embedded in the ennui and existential angst of his idiosyncratically dreary design is a canvas on which which his personal philosophies on modern life can shine through. It is a sad, ashen, lonely landscape of sets on which even the smallest display of genuine humanity stands out and shines, which is why we think it's one of the best examples of production design of all time. So what do you think? Disagree with any of our picks? Did we leave out one of your favorite movie worlds? That's just life, I guess, filled with many wonders and over before you reach most of them. Oh well, let us know in the comments below and be sure to subscribe for more CineFix movie lists.